Welcome back to CVM at Sunrise. Poverty is an international crisis, and many organizations have tried different ways to alleviate it. In observance of International Day for Poverty Eradication on Friday, October 17, the United Nations agencies in Jamaica will be jointly implementing a campaign with the theme "Poverty is an Emergency. Stand up, speak out, take action." Here to tell us about the plan is Machel Stewart, Poverty Advisor, UNDP, and Carol Narcisse, Communication Advisor, also from the UNDP. Welcome to CVM at Sunrise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. We were just discussing that with this financial crisis, poverty is going to, what is it, double, triple? What do you think?
I think it's anyone's guess what's going to happen. And you can add to the financial crisis the food crisis and the crisis with oil, with fuel. And so altogether the world has been experiencing a series of shocks and trauma, really. And it is expected, it's inevitable. Usually when there are crises, it is the poor that is impacted the most. And when there is a boom, it is the poor that isn't necessarily the one to benefit.
Define poverty for me.
Well, poverty is really a multidimensional phenomenon. So when you're talking about poverty, you're talking about income, persons who are unable to meet a certain basic income. That's income poverty. But in its widest definition, it's about the denial of basic amenities. It's about a standard of living that is really below what would be ideal. So we're talking about poor education, we're talking about poor living conditions, we're talking about poor healthcare, basic services. So we're talking about everything that is basically a denial of what we would call a basic minimum standard of living.
And when you take into account that all of those things that Machel just described are the things that give you the capacity to come out of poverty: good health, income, employment, education, stable family, stable community. Those things work together to give you capacity to make your way out of poverty. So what we're seeing in Jamaica and elsewhere is multi-generational poverty. Yes? Once upon a time, grandma and grandpa might have been poor, but there was a hope that their children and their children's children could make it out. The conditions are becoming so acute that in some instances, you're talking about grandparents, then the children, then their children, and they still are not able to move themselves out of.
All right, let's talk about internationally first, and then we can bring it home to Jamaica. How serious, as of today, how serious, give me some concrete statistics now, on how far reaching the problem of poverty is.
Why don't you take local first, Machel?
Okay. Well, locally, we have about a poverty rate officially of about 13.5 or 0.6%. And this has been declining over the last 10 years or so. But what it doesn't tell you is the amount of persons who are just above that poverty line, which is a significant number. So these are persons who, with the slightest shift in the ground, can find themselves below the poverty line. And it's a problem which is going to increase once we have these issues with food prices and we have the issues of the global financial crisis. And so locally you'll find that it's a big problem. And we have a situation where our population is aging. We have a decrease in the number of persons who are between 0 and 15, and an increase in the number of persons who are between 16 and 65. And what you're also finding is that poverty doesn't impact persons equally. It impacts children and youth. It impacts single-parent households, especially female-headed. And it also impacts rural persons much more than urban persons. So you'll find that two-thirds, 65%, 66% of the persons who are poor are found in rural areas in Jamaica. And you'll find a slightly higher incidence of poverty in female-headed households.
Does poverty have anything to do with a psychological kind of outlook on your situation? I'll tell you why I ask. You say that rural persons in rural Jamaica some of them are living below the poverty line. However, I get the sense that persons living, say for example, in the ghettos of Kingston, below the poverty line feel it more. Is that the case?
That's a common perception, but it is really not true.
Okay.
We tend to idealize and stylize rural Jamaica, and I'm born and grew in rural Jamaica.
Right.
You know, but we tend to think of rural Jamaica as an idyllic place with lots of family-oriented villages. But when you have households or communities where children go to school without without shoes, without the proper uniforms. I went to school in a cane-growing area in Clarkstown, Trelawney, and when you have children who tell you from grade 3 they don't need an education because they can drive a tractor or they can reap cane for master this or master that, you get an idea that is a phenomenon that is far-reaching. They have no access to proper infrastructure, hospitals, water, you name it.
One of the things on the urban side is that it's concentrated in smaller areas, yes? And that concentration in smaller areas, anything you pack into a small space is going to be more combustible than when it's spread out in the rural setting. So the urban poverty tends to feel more acute because it's packed into a small area, and then you have attendant problems of violence and so on occurring more so in the urban settings, whether that's urbanized rural areas or in the Kingston and St. Andrew area. So urbanization does add a quality to the poverty experience that fuels that perception of it being greater.
All right, internationally now, where does Jamaica rank in terms?
We are a middle-income country, and so we rank below many of our Caribbean neighbors. But clearly we rank above many areas of Africa and South Pacific.
Define below and above for me.
We are better, significantly, than the least developed countries in Africa and in Southeast Asia. But we are below the OECD countries like the Europeans, the North Americans, and even our own Caribbean. Barbados and Trinidad are in a higher income bracket. They have a higher standard of living than we have here.
So poverty is worse here?
Yes, easily.
Okay. Now, who is to blame for that? I'm going to come to your theme, but who is to blame for that? We blame the government. Is it their fault?
Boy, you know, you start going down the wrong road if you say to yourself, there is a person to blame. Poverty is a function, as Machel said, of a number of factors working together. Within those factors, there are issues like, how are we distributing the results of the goods and services that the country produces? How is that? What are the structures of opportunity for people? And are we creating the society in a way that enables people to have access to the kinds of goods and services that enable them to move themselves out of poverty? What are our family structures like, and what's happening to family structures? So there are a multiplicity of reasons. There's enough blame, if you want to do that, to go around. The question is, it's more a question of who is responsible for creating the conditions that help people to move out of poverty. And that's a collective responsibility.
I love
the state having a very important role to play.
I love your theme, poverty is an emergency. Stand up, speak out, take action. It has nothing to do with fundraising, interestingly. Stand up, speak out, take action. It seems like you're speaking to us as a people.
That is what we're doing, because
the average person can do something.
Absolutely. That is our message.
Even if you don't have any money.
Quite so. The person who mentors a young person, who gives of his or her time, so that that young person begins to experience another world beyond the world that they live in. That person is making an important contribution to the amelioration of poverty, particularly poverty of mind, spirit, and self. So there's a lot that each of us can do, and that is the message in this campaign, that every one of us, regardless of where we are in terms of our station in life, that there is something that each one can reach one, and each one can also begin to articulate that this is an important development issue for Jamaica and for the rest of the world. We have to make it our business, and then we have to act.
All right, we will be hearing more about this Poverty Eradication Day on